The thrilling movie about brutal murders begins with a man stalking a woman on a rainy day. On that day, Detective Chandler Manning meets with Detective Wilkinson at a crime scene. They are there to investigate the brutal murder of a young woman in her 30s, a prostitute, found dead on a street in Los Angeles. Joe Bunting picks up the newspaper from the yard and sits down for breakfast. Meanwhile, his wife, Ellen Bunting, is preparing food with a visibly upset mood. She's angry because Joe worked until 4 a.m. that night. Ellen hears about the woman's murder on the news and learns that the police suspect the murder is similar to those committed by Alonzo Rodriguez 7 years ago. The weapon used is a knife. As Ellen listens, she stares at the knife Joe is using to eat, taking a deep breath as she ponders something. The reporter on TV mentions that Alonzo was executed in July for brutally murdering 2 women in West Hollywood. Detective Chandler tells the reporter that the Rodriguez incident was isolated and unrelated to the recent murder, emphasizing that the woman was a prostitute. Joe asks Ellen if anyone had shown interest in renting their guest house, which they've posted online. She replies that 3 people came, and he tells her to lower the rent. Chandler Manning becomes frustrated with his higher-ups for assigning his new partner, the rookie Detective Wilkinson, to the case. Wilkinson responds, explaining that he has spent 14 months on this case. He hands Chandler a letter, which Chandler opens and reads. Ellen teaches their son how to draw, and Joe interrupts, telling Ellen to take her pills. He warns her that no one will rent the guest house if they find out about her condition. Chandler Manning calls his daughter, Amanda, asking if he can visit her mother. Amanda refuses, citing her busy schedule with caring for her mother and exams. Despite Chandler's insistence on meeting, Amanda tells him she's too busy and hangs up. A man arrives at the Bunting house to rent the guest house. He claims to be a writer in need of a quiet room for inspiration, and Ellen shows him the room. The medical examiner informs Detective Chandler that the victim died immediately after being stabbed in the throat. He expresses sympathy for Chandler's wife and asks about her condition. Chandler informs him that she's not doing well. The tenant, Malcolm State, agrees to rent the room and introduces himself to Ellen. He demands the room key and insists that no one disturb him. Ellen mentions her husband Joe, but Malcolm insists on privacy, paying the rent up front. The police check previous murder cases of 2 prostitutes named Sally Harrison and Olive, who were also victims of brutal killings. They suspect that the killer is copying the style of Rodriguez's killings. Ellen brings Malcolm tea, but he tells her not to disturb him again. Malcolm removes the pictures from the wall and refuses Joe's help, insisting on privacy. He gives Ellen money to buy something for him. Detective Wilkinson and Chandler interview a witness who claims to have seen a man in a long purple coat, similar to Neo, running away from the crime scene. Chandler meets with his daughter Amanda at dinner, where Amanda accuses him of being controlling and obsessive, blaming him for her mother's condition. Chandler tries to explain himself, but Amanda refuses to listen and tells him to leave. Chandler kisses his daughter on the forehead as he leaves, and Amanda cries after he departs. Joe Bunting asks Ellen about the guest house, and she tells him that she rented it to Malcolm, who paid 3 months' rent in advance. When Joe sees the money, he assumes it's from Ellen's family and thinks it's another hallucination. Ellen warns Joe not to go into Malcolm's room, as Malcolm only wants her to come in. Joe doesn't believe they have a tenant. Detective Wilkinson tells Chandler that there are no signs of a struggle on the body of the woman murdered on Sunset Boulevard. Chandler asks him about the letter, and Wilkinson informs him that they only found fingerprints from the post office. Wilkinson mentions the witness, but Chandler pulls him aside, telling him he knows the pimp is not the killer. He accuses Wilkinson of trying to impress people with his efforts, urging him to focus on finding the real suspects instead of wasting time on the innocent ones. Ellen tries to call Joe repeatedly, but she doesn't get a response. When Joe comes home, he asks Ellen about the smell in the house. She explains she's making granola, which is for Malcolm. She tells Joe to dry his wet shoes so as not to wake the lodger. She also reminds him to take his medicine on time before going to work. Chandler is seen sleeping on the couch, and the camera zooms in on a picture of his wife and daughter. Ellen, sitting on the bed with her son, hears a strange noise outside and sees the lodger, Malcolm, entering the guest room. As Ellen lies in bed, she experiences a hallucination where she imagines a person following a woman dressed in bright clothes, as if returning from a club. The person grabs her and pulls her into an isolated area where the woman is killed. The medical examiner later assures Chandler and Wilkinson that these 2 prostitutes were killed by the same person who murdered 2 women 7 years ago, implying that Alonzo might have been wrongly executed. Wilkinson refuses to believe it, citing blood evidence and a weapon found in Rodriguez's apartment. The doctor and Chandler conclude that the killer is imitating the style of Jack the Ripper, who murdered women with 39 incisions in London in 1888. Ellen waits at the table with breakfast prepared, her son sitting beside her. When the time is up, Ellen heads to the guest house to deliver food to the lodger, Malcolm. At a press conference, Chandler tells reporters that the two women murdered in West Hollywood were killed by the same person who murdered two women 7 years ago on Sunset Boulevard. The killer mimicked the Jack the Ripper style, and Alonzo Rodriguez was innocent. Amanda sees her father on the news and feels embarrassed. Chandler instructs Detective Wilkinson to gather all information about Jack the Ripper and the number of people he killed, and tells him he will be back at 4. Chandler visits Dr. Stevens at the hospital, who tells him that his wife is making some progress but is still struggling with depression and needs someone with her. The doctor advises Chandler not to visit her now, but Chandler insists and is finally allowed in. Chandler asks his wife, Max, why she tried to commit suicide. Max begins to cry and asks Chandler to leave. He exits the room, hearing her cries echoing down the hallway. He feels upset and dizzy. Meanwhile, Malcolm returns the utensils and sits down for coffee. He asks Ellen about her husband, and she explains he works and goes to the gym. When their hands accidentally touch as she hands him the coffee, Ellen feels a spark of intimacy. Ellen questions him about his late return the previous night, which made her suspicious. Malcolm claims he had some work and leaves. Detective Wilkinson calls Chandler to inform him that the FBI profilers are meeting with Sam and want all 3 of them, including Smith, at the station. Chandler hangs up angrily. Chandler finally arrives at the station. Ellen sees Malcolm outside, standing near a fire. He explains that he was drying his clothes, but they caught fire. Ellen invites him inside to use the dryer, and Malcolm demands to borrow Joe's clothes. Ellen agrees. Wilkinson instructs Gregor to gather all the information on Jack the Ripper from 1888. At the station, a colleague offends Chandler by suggesting he framed the wrong man. Chandler searches through the files and finds a colleague following him. The colleague pulls a gun on Chandler, and Chandler leaves the station. Chandler finds the Ripper letter in the evidence of the previous case, which framed Alonzo Rodriguez. Chandler is informed of his earlier behavior, and Ellen sees Malcolm shirtless through the window. She nervously runs to her room, hearing footsteps she assumes are Malcolm, but it's Joe coming to retrieve his forgotten bag. The medical examiner tells Chandler and Wilkinson that Chandler's earlier comments 7 years ago may have triggered the killer. They conclude that the killer is intelligent and has medical training, based on how the victims were dissected. The doctor also reveals that no sexual assault was found on the victims, which is particularly shocking. Chandler wonders why the killer appears after 7 years, and the doctor explains that the killer's anger could resurface at any time or cease, depending on their condition. The doctor believes the killer is leaving Jack the Ripper signs on purpose to mislead them. Ellen hears a noise and goes downstairs, where she sees Malcolm selecting a knife. He asks her for scissors, and she hands them to him as she stands close by. Later, Ellen lies in bed and experiences a hallucination in which a man carrying a bag passes by prostitutes, who are then killed by another man. Meanwhile, Wilkinson reads about the women killed in the same manner. The police, along with Chandler, arrive at the scene of another murder, where 2 prostitutes have been killed in the same Jack the Ripper style. Wilkinson mentions that the letter previously found is similar to the one from the original killings, and they discover a tissue in the trash, concluding that the women were cut with scissors. They interview a terrified witness, who says the killer may have the same height as Chandler and was wearing a long coat with a small bag. Joe hears the news about Rodriguez being wrongly executed and the public protests. At Chandler's office, Chandler tells Wilkinson he missed something and shows him the Lusk letter, which the Ripper sent to George Lusk after a double murder. Chandler reveals that the letter was found in Rodriguez's file. He tells Wilkinson that the FBI profilers were right. 7 years ago, in a press conference, Chandler made a comment about getting rid of the modern-day Jack the Ripper, which may have triggered the killer. The killer sent the letter shortly after, but Chandler ignored it and filed it away. Chandler now confirms that the letter is from the killer. He tells Wilkinson they have only a few weeks to find him before he disappears again. Wilkinson shows Chandler a footprint with a size 10 shoe found at the crime scene. Chandler receives a call from Bill and becomes upset. In a meeting, Chandler is suspended for pulling a gun on a colleague and for stealing evidence from Rodriguez's file. Ellen brings food to Malcolm's room, where he stands on a newspaper with the same size 10 shoe print. They share an intimate moment, kissing, when Joe comes downstairs and finds Ellen gone. He checks the guest house and sees Ellen coming out, telling Joe she was watching her boots. Ellen compares the shoe prints in the newspaper to the crime scene photos. and Wilkinson angrily confronts Bill for leaking the footprint information. Ellen tells Joe that something is wrong with Malcolm, and Joe gets angry, not believing there was ever a lodger. He pulls Ellen to the guest house to check on Malcolm, but the room is empty. Wilkinson receives a list of suspects, and both Chandler and Joe Bunting's names are included. Wilkinson learns from Smith that evidence from the Ripper letter points to Chandler as the suspect, suggesting that Chandler framed Rodriguez 7 years ago and is now trying to cover for him again. He also believes Chandler is responsible for his wife's suicide, but Wilkinson refuses to believe Chandler is the killer. The investigation leads Chandler and Wilkinson to the Bunting house because Joe's name is on the list. They question Ellen about Joe and get his work address. While searching the guest room, Chandler senses Ellen is hiding something. She cleans the house obsessively. Another prostitute is attacked, and Wilkinson begins to suspect Chandler is the killer. Ellen confronts Malcolm, angry that he doesn't want her in his room. Joe learns that the cops have been asking about him and Ellen. Wilkinson finds a map marked with red ink, and they suspect Chandler is the killer. Chandler finds an article about a landlady who had a lodger, and he is arrested as a suspect for planting evidence. Joe is found missing. Amanda leaves her dorm, followed by the man in the long coat. Chandler and Wilkinson track the killer to Amanda's location. They manage to reach her in time, with Chandler shooting the attacker and saving Amanda. The suspect injures Chandler, but the police arrive soon after. They head to the Bunting house, where they find Ellen sitting in a chair with a knife. Ellen is arrested, and Joe is found seriously injured. Doctors conclude that Ellen developed schizophrenia after losing their child 8 years ago. They explain that the lodger was a fictional creation of her mind, and she committed all the murders. Authorities accept this explanation, closing the case. The final image shows the lodger entering a new house in Santa Monica. And to enter another nice story, I recommend you click my recaps on the right next. Come back to the lounge anytime by subscribing to the channel. Grab your popcorn, enjoy yourself, and see you soon, my friend.